G'day and welcome back to the channel. So in today's video, I want to talk to you about why you should consider wearing barefoot shoes. And I want to do so by providing the necessary context to help you better understand why they're potentially helpful, and what you need to consider if you're potentially transitioning from years or decades of traditional built-up footwear over to a minimalist or barefoot shoe. So I think the first thing that's really important to cover when we're discussing why you should be considering wearing a pair of barefoot or minimalist shoes is that it's important to acknowledge the conjecture that's currently around these shoes. And for me, clinically as a physiotherapist, there's two main reasons why people tend to frown upon barefoot or minimalist shoes. The first is that a lot of people have had the best intentions of transitioning to a pair of barefoot shoes, but ultimately become sore, painful, or even injured because of it. And that's perfectly valid and perfectly understandable. And the second is that research tends to support that. There's countless pieces of research that have highlighted people becoming sore, injured, and damaged when transitioning from a pair of regular shoes to a pair of minimalist barefoot shoes. Part of the reason why I wanted to make this video is I wanted to definitely validate those experiences because research shows what it shows and your lived experience is your lived experience, and all research is important in its own way. But what's really crucial to understand about barefoot shoes is that if we can take a big enough step back to consider more information than a lot of people intuitively think of, make this context more understandable, so that by the end of this video, I'm hopeful that you would consider making your next pair of shoes, if not a pair of minimalist shoes, at least one step closer to achieving that goal. So I think the first step to understanding why barefoot or minimalist shoes are potentially good for you is that being barefoot is normal. Obviously, we aren't born with shoes in our feet. Shoes are inherently an external device that we put onto our feet, mainly because they either look good, they feel good, or in a roundabout way, we think that they're doing us good at the same time. Now, obviously, in a perfect world, we'd all be barefoot all the time, but thanks to modern living, the surfaces that we now have, the hygiene standards, the social standards, where it's pretty weird to turn up to a restaurant barefoot these days, we definitely need to make some allowances that don't allow us to be barefoot all day, every day. But it's important to respect the idea that being barefoot is still the most normal experience for our feet. And in theory, if we can't be barefoot, then the next most normal experience for our foot is enough material or technology to buffer the hygiene and the social standards that we need to come up against day to day. But one of the problems that we run into with traditional modern footwear is that there's a lot of technology added to that shoe. And in a lot of ways, traditional footwear with thick heels, arch support, strong inflexible soles, pointy toe boxes, each potentially serve a purpose, whether it be fashion, protection, pain relief. But when we also take that step back, we realize that it's actually pretty far removed from what the foot and ankle and the leg potentially need to function optimally long term. So from that piece of information alone, when we circle back and respect the fact that minimalist shoes can increase pain and cause injury, and that it is potentially backed up by a lot of research, it suggests that we're missing something, that there's a disconnect there where being barefoot or minimalist is more normal, but yet when you're barefoot or minimalist, you're more likely to get injured or become sore. And in my experience over the last 20 years as a physiotherapist, trying to better understand concepts like this, what I've come to understand is that barefoot or minimalist shoes, they will rarely cause you pain and dysfunction outright. But what they're really good at is exposing hidden underlying dysfunction that was present before you even put your foot into a minimalist shoe or set foot onto a hard surface. And when we add in things like running, walking, the repetition and duration is also very good at exposing hidden underlying dysfunction. So if you are someone that can look back over the years and you've always worn traditional shoes that maybe have a heel, arch support, they're not flexible, they're tough, you've got a pointy toe box, then without you realizing it, you may have started to deteriorate the natural order of your leg and foot mechanics, death by 1,000 cuts without realizing it. And then when you've tried to do the right thing and put your foot back into a pair of shoes that maybe don't offer you any of the support or protection you've had for the last 10, 15, 20, 40 years, it still may never guarantee that you will develop pain or an injury, but if you do, then hindsight might be more clear. And while I would never advocate for anybody to jump from a pair of traditional built-up shoes straight into a pair of minimalist or barefoot shoes straight away, we need to start to encourage people to work back towards feeling more comfortable in these types of shoes long-term, as a sign that our underlying inherent mechanics are improving and normalizing once again. So at this point, if you are someone that's still a little bit confused or unsure as to why barefoot shoes may be good for you, when a lot of people's lived experience and a lot of research potentially doesn't support that yet, then I really wanted to talk about some of the pros and cons of barefoot shoes just to help you get a better understanding of why they should be potentially good for you at some stage. And the first reason is that barefoot and minimalist shoes don't traditionally have a heel. And while we're not necessarily talking about a stiletto or a really thick heel, any shoe that you wear that has any heel where the back of the shoe sits higher than the front of the shoe, then that is the exact amount of ankle range of motion you will not get access to while you're in that shoe. And as the saying goes, if you don't use it, you will lose it. And for me, clinically as a physiotherapist, ankle immobility or ankle stiffness is one of the leading underlying hidden causes of so much dysfunction, ranging from knee pain to the more obvious things like Achilles tendinitises, ankle dysfunction, calf tears, shin splints. Even something like bunions can be a mechanical compensation or a mechanical cause of a lack of range of motion further up the mechanical chain. And one of the biggest reasons why I'm an advocate for barefoot or minimalist shoes is because they don't have a heel. But the challenge is, if you've been in heeled shoes for as long as you can remember, going straight to a pair of barefoot shoes that doesn't have a heel can absolutely increase your chances of developing shin splints, Achilles pain, plantar fasciitis, all these other things, because you're now doing it in an environment that asks more of your leg mechanics than you currently have. But like I said, it doesn't mean that you shouldn't transition to this. But what it does suggest is that you do want to make a pair of shoes like this an end goal to achieve at some stage down the track, once you've been working on improving the mechanics of your leg and the mobility of your ankle. And the second positive about minimalist shoes, and this may not seem like it, but most minimalist shoes don't have arch support. Again, this may sound counterintuitive because you'll hear so much that in order to improve your plantar fasciitis or Achilles issues or knee pain or leg dysfunction as a whole, things like arch supportive shoes or shoe inserts or orthotics are a must. And while these things can absolutely improve the function of your leg and ultimately make those symptoms feel better, we then don't give you an ability to get out of those things eventually. We often assume that as soon as you put an orthotic in your shoe, that's just you now forever. But if we can understand that your foot and your leg has all the arch that it needs in theory, then again, we can start to take steps towards improving the natural function of your arch so that it can then tolerate no arch support in the shoes that you wear. And again, if we take that big step back and just talk about the basic concept of arches, is that we know in architecture and building that arches aren't supposed to be a weight-bearing surface. So if you have a shoe that has arch support or an orthotic that supports your arch, again, that can be great short-term if you just need some pain relief. But long term, we need to get your arch back to functioning normally without support underneath it. So this probably speaks to the broader conversation about arch support and whether it's useful or not. But it's that context that's really important to understand, that your foot and leg shouldn't be supported from underneath. You should have the inherent function and activity to create that arch on its own, which is how your leg's supposed to function. And while strategies to improve ankle mobility and the function of your arch aren't really the focus of this video, please head up here and explore some options that we have on the channel already. So the third reason why minimalist or barefoot shoes are fantastic for your feet is that they generally have a broad or a wide toe box. The reason why this is significant is that a wider toe box lets your feet and your toes be feet and toes. It allows them to splay, and it just gives them the breathing room to just function as they should. And if you'd like a really simple way to know how good your shoes have been in this regard, if you take your shoes off and look at your feet and you see that your toes look like they're squished into a point, then there's a very good chance that you have altered the way that your foot and toes function without realizing it. So the fourth thing that's really good about barefoot shoes is kind of the gimmick or the wow factor that's often associated with them. And that's that the sole is quite soft and flexible. You should be able to scrunch your shoes up into a ball to highlight how flexible in all directions that sole might be. And again, the reason why this is a good thing is that your foot is also very flexible and malleable. It has this amazing ability to contort to the environments that it comes in contact with. If you're walking over a rock, it can conform to that rock shape. But it also has this amazing ability that, thanks to good arch function, it can flick into a very strong, rigid structure so that we can walk or run or jump from. But if you consistently have a shoe that's rigid, then you can very easily lose some of that foot flexibility, that inherent mobility through the joints and tissues of your foot that's crucial for normal function. And on top of that, having a foot that's flexible and malleable is also a great way to absorb shock and force. If the sole of your shoe is really rigid, then it can alter the way that your entire leg experiences the loading that happens when you walk on the surfaces that you walk on. So if you're walking on grass, for example, or running on grass versus running on concrete, a harder shoe will cause more force to travel through your leg, potentially through your knee, through your hips, and even your lower back, when you potentially don't need to. And again, if you are someone that has foot and ankle dysfunction or knee dysfunction, restoring some normal flexibility to your foot can help feed some slack back into those irritated and annoyed tissues. Further to this, if you are someone that experiences neuropathies and have sensory issues with your feet, the harder and the thicker the material is that surrounds your foot, the more desensitized that foot can become. While nothing beats just being barefoot and having that foot come in contact with different surfaces and get different stimuli day to day to keep it energized and sensitized, the more material that separates you from the outside world has the potential to desensitize that foot further. The fifth pro is that barefoot minimalist shoes now are both comfortable and now look good. Gone are the days where a barefoot or minimalist shoe has to be that ugly looking toe shoe that used to be quite popular. There's now minimalist and barefoot devoted brands like Zero, Vivo Barefoot, Vibram, Whiten, and even a company like Fieldgrounds, which were good enough to send me these shoes and a pair for my son as well. So we now have the capacity and the variety to choose the shoes that we want to wear. We can compare pricing, we can compare designs and brands to choose something that we're ultimately happy with. And so pro number 6 is potentially the most important one to consider. And this leans on my experience as a physiotherapist, where my passion and drive as a physio is to try and better understand the root underlying causes of all the aches and pains that people tend to experience. And what I've come to understand is that so many of the aches and pains, especially in the lower half, obviously, that we sustain, can in some way be traced and attributed back to the types of shoes that we wear day to day. And the extension of that is, the sooner we can get people into barefoot shoes where we don't have heels, or we don't have unnecessary arch support, or the toes aren't getting squished, the better chance you'll have to avoid any unnecessary aches, pains, and injuries down the track. And as a parent, it's really important that we consider getting our kids into barefoot or minimalist shoes as soon as humanly possible. Obviously, it's better to keep them barefoot for as long as possible where it's appropriate. But as soon as they need to wear a pair of shoes, whether that be going to school or starting to play sport, please do them a favor and look for something that has the characteristics that we've already started to discuss, to hopefully set them up for success for the rest of their lives. And I know how frustrating it is as a parent to go to a lot of the traditional shoe stores and department stores, and how hard it is to find a pair of shoes that doesn't have a thick heel or an arch support or a pointy toe box. So if you can use one of the companies that I've mentioned, especially Fieldgrounds if you're that way inclined, and see if you can find something your child may be comfortable wearing that may help foster and perpetuate a normal environment for their foot and legs to function in, and hopefully keep a hold of their function for longer, as much as you can in this modern world of ours. So now that we've talked about the pros of barefoot or minimalist shoes, we also need to talk about the cons. And as I mentioned on the top of the video, if you're someone who's tried barefoot shoes and had a bad experience, or you've seen research that suggests that barefoot shoes are bad for you, that's all very valid. But as I mentioned, when we take that bigger step back, we can hopefully start to understand that all barefoot shoes are trying to do is create a more normal, natural environment for normal, natural leg mechanics to function within. But the biggest issue that we have with barefoot shoes, as I experienced myself, is that because they don't have a heel, because they don't have arch support, because they give your toes space, because they're flexible, they can very easily expose years of hidden built-up dysfunction that you may not have realized was there. Truth be told, you don't have to have perfect leg mechanics to feel comfortable in these, but each person will have a threshold where their mechanics need to have progressed back to being good enough to comfortably tolerate the environment that a barefoot shoe will create for you. So if your heeled shoes have stiffened up your ankle and your arch support has taken the onus off the structures that should be creating that arch for you, then as soon as you take that away, there's a very real possibility that something somewhere within your leg may start to hurt or feel a bit weird and uncomfortable. But hopefully you can appreciate the broader context enough to get to work on chipping away at your ankle flexibility, your foot muscle strength, your calf strength, and even your knee, hip, and lower back function, just to optimize how your leg is functioning so that when you put your foot back into a pair of minimalist shoes, you now have the capacity to tolerate that better. Listen to what your body is telling you about how much is too much in the moment, and then just gradually increase the time, the duration spent in these shoes until you feel inherently comfortable. But ultimately, what I wanted to achieve with this video is I didn't want to necessarily tell you that you have to wear a pair of barefoot shoes at some stage, but I wanted to cover some reasonable discussion points that'll hopefully give you a broader perspective about what minimalist shoes can do for you, but also what they might be doing to you if you're feeling sore or uncomfortable from wearing them. To be clear, being barefoot is normal. It's exactly what your foot is designed to be. But obviously in today's modern world, we have to make certain allowances, whether it be for hygiene purposes or social standards, and that's okay. But at the end of the day, if you feel like any aspect of a modern piece of footwear, whether it be the heel, the sole, the arch support, or something about that shoe makes you feel better, then it's potentially hiding something or buffering something that you may need to address long term if you want to avoid some eventual aches, pains, or dysfunctions. Similarly, if you put yourself into a pair of barefoot shoes and it sucks and it feels crap, please don't automatically assume that the shoe was the problem. If you can speak to someone like myself, well, we can take a step back and try and analyze what it is about your leg mechanics. Are your ankles stiff? Is your big toe stiff? Are you missing some foot strength or foot flexibility? Are your hips weak? Are they tight? Is your lower back dysfunctional? Are any of these things going on underneath the surface? And the difference between feeling good or not may just be the shoe that you put your body into. But ultimately, the long-term goal should be for you to feel comfortable tolerating barefoot shoes at some stage. Because what that means is that your leg mechanics are good enough that we can assume that they have normalized more than what they would have been if you're in built-up traditional shoes. So once again, I genuinely hope that that was helpful and insightful in some way. A big thank you again to Fieldgrounds for sending me some shoes to test out. I'm a huge advocate of barefoot shoes, and pairing up with a company that deals with barefoot shoes is a dream come true for me. If you would like to make the next pair of shoes that you buy a pair of barefoot shoes, then please head to the description and click the link provided. But at the end of the day, context and perspective is really important to appreciate why barefoot shoes are potentially fantastic for us to work towards at some stage. Please let me know in the comments down below what you think of this. Have you tried barefoot shoes before, and what's been your experience? If this video resonated with you, please consider leaving a like on the video and subscribe to the channel if you want more of this type of content. But once again, I sincerely hope that that was helpful, and I hope to see you next time. Bye. Are they comfy? Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you.
And do we get to keep these?
Yeah, they're yours.
Yeah.